This is Washington Crossing Historic Park in Washington Crossing, Pennsylvania. Now, George Washington made his historic crossing of the Delaware on Christmas evening, 1776. Several factors made it the perfect night to cross. Washington knew that the Hessian army camped out over in Trenton would consider Christmas to be an unlikely night for an attack. Furthermore, the weather was dreadful. So dreadful, in fact, that the Hessian sentries, whose job it was to keep an eye on the river, had been given the night off.
Let's review where we were in the war. Washington's first major battle was the Battle of Dorchester Heights in Boston. His strategy there had been brilliant, and he drove the British out of the city with their tail between their legs. That was in March 1776. In July, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. His next major encounter was Long Island in New York City, where he was driven out with his tail between his legs. The invading British army had chased Washington across New Jersey after the loss of New York. The news of this had an effect on the American colonists that was perhaps quite opposite of what you might expect. Instead of being outraged and resentful, a defeatist mood was spreading throughout the colonies. To make matters even worse, enlistments for most of Washington's men were set to expire on December 31st. With morale so low, he had no idea how many men might leave. Washington faced a fairly desperate situation, but it is in such dire circumstances where heroes are made and legends are created.
Time was not his friend, and a bold plan was needed. Washington had written the words "victory or death" on a piece of paper and left it on his desk. Such was the mindset of our future president.
Fortunately for Washington, the British Army had not pursued him as aggressively as they should have. Instead of the full British Army camping nearby, there were only about 1,200 conscripted Hessian soldiers keeping an eye on him from across the river. Washington had a 1-2 punch in mind: attack the Hessians in Trenton, then attack the British up the road in Princeton.
Now, what had saved Washington from being followed back across the Delaware after the retreat was the fact that he had gathered up virtually all the boats in this entire area. During the retreat, he had ordered that every single boat that could be located on the New Jersey side be taken as they retreated back to the Pennsylvania side of the Delaware.
That cold, wet, miserable evening of his attack, Washington managed to get 2,400 men, horses, and Henry Knox and his artillery across the broad, ice-clogged Delaware River. It was so miserable, Washington lost several men to hypothermia.
Now, just to sort of kind of give you a glimpse of the scope of that endeavor, without the 18th century technology and the bad weather, I thought I might drive across the Delaware. No, not on that safe, modern, useful bridge that we saw earlier. No, since this is drive-through history, I thought I would drive across the Delaware in a car. Or a boat, really. It's, well, kind of a bar or a coat. I mean, it's a boat car. I'm the king of the world! This is the Amphicar, a car that floats. Check out the twin screws. It's a little boat lingo for propeller. Oh!
The Amphicar is designed to meet all your commuting and boating needs. For instance, how many times have you driven by a lake and said to yourself, if only I could drive across the lake and not have to go all the way around, I could save a ton of time. And hey, if I threw a fishing pole over the side, I might even catch dinner. And hey, if my wife was with me, she could water ski behind the car. Yes, the Amphicar was built to address just such practical needs. It was a car designed for, finger quotes, the future. Back in those heady days in the early 60s Cold War era when everyone wanted to be a secret agent. Eventually, the Amphicar company figured we'd all want floating and flying cars. Come to think of it, where is the flying car?
Now, the power plant of this bad boy is a 69 cubic inch Triumph engine. Cranks out about 43 horsepower. In other words, may have been pretty state-of-the-art for 1967, but it's just a skosh underpowered for today's standards.
The car and the boat steers with the front wheels.
How's this for cool? A bilge pump came standard on every Amphicar. Does your car have a bilge pump? Well, then I wouldn't laugh. They can come in mighty handy. Trust me.
The Amphicar will do 7 knots in the water and about 70 miles per hour on the road. Okay, here's an important question that's been plaguing serious historians for decades. If George Washington had an Amphicar, would he have used it on that epic crossing of the Delaware? For the rest of the story, we'll need to drive over to Trenton. Let's go.
In war, as in sports, momentum, or the Big Mo, is all important. After the Battle of New York, the British had it, and we didn't. Trenton changed all that, and if you analyze what happened, the question of character comes into play. George Washington was hardworking, brave, and sober. Colonel Johann Rall, his Hessian opponent, was hardworking and brave, but was known for having a drinking problem. Colonel Rall had distinguished himself at the Battle of New York, and British General Howe had placed him into a position of great trust here in Trenton, despite his character flaw. It's just coffee.
So bad judgment on the part of Howe and bad character on the part of Rall would contribute to the British loss in Trenton, and even cost Rall his life. There was an interesting side story that shows that the Americans apparently exploited Rall's drinking problem. Abraham Hunt, an unsung hero in the Battle of Trenton, was given the job of staying up half the night and having a party with Colonel Rall. Their heavy toasting and drinking left Colonel Rall in no position to fight when Washington arrived early on the morning of December 26, 1776.
After a brief skirmish at a Hessian outpost, Washington set up here, at a place now known as 5 Points, because it's the point at which 5 major streets converge here in Trenton. He ordered artillery to be set up here. Now, the Hessian army was asleep in houses along Warren and Broad Streets. Firing volleys of artillery down these streets prevented the Hessians from forming into lines and made them unable to effectively mobilize. Then the fighting broke out. It was the bloody, brutal, hand-to-hand with bayonet variety. It was all over in under 90 minutes. Colonel Rall was woken up from a drunken sleep by gunfire. He quickly realized that his only hope was to withdraw and try to regroup. He was shot from his horse right near this very location, what is now St. Marys Cathedral. In fact, there's a plaque here commemorating the event. The Hessian army surrendered soon thereafter.
There were no American deaths that day. James Monroe, the future 5th President of the United States, was wounded near here in the battle.
On January 3rd, 1777, just 9 days after his bold attack on the Hessian regiments in the Battle of Trenton, General George Washington's Revolutionary Forces scored another strategic, significant victory against the British forces here at Princeton.